All right, everyone, welcome to the Using Your Voice to Advocate for Yourself, Families, and Change in the Early Childhood Field with Susan Butler-Staub and Christin Davis. We are so excited to have you. My name is Tracy, and I will be moderating today's session. I will be monitoring questions in the chat, and if you have any issues, you can send me a direct message through the Zoom chat. We ask that everyone stays on mute during the session unless you have a question or to participate in the conversation. This helps reduce the background noise. We encourage you to be on video if you can, so we can see each other and build community. But if you are more comfortable or must be off video for children and other reasons, we definitely understand. If you would like to read the transcript or see closed caption for this session, please click on the button that says CC Live Transcript, then choose Show Subtitle. You can hide the subtitles by repeating the process. Please share your thoughts, questions, affirmations, or anything that is particularly interesting to you in the chat or through the reaction buttons. Now I will introduce you to Susan and Christin. Susan is a policy and community engagement coordinator for the North Carolina Early Education Coalition. Prior to this position, she spent 6 years as an early instructor of early childhood education at Central Piedmont Community College. Susan also worked for over 10 years as a part of North Carolina's Child Care Resource and Referral Field as a trainer and technical assistance provider. Before moving to North Carolina in the early 2000s, Susan worked as an infant, toddler, and preschool teacher and in the program coordination and administration for child care programs. Susan is particularly interested in developing the knowledge and skills of early childhood teachers and administrators and in promoting an understanding of child development among new parents and community members. Christin is an infant toddler project manager for the North Carolina Early Education Coalition. Prior to this position, she spent 5 years working with Early Head Start, beginning as an education specialist, working her way to the child development and education manager, and ultimately reaching the EHS program director role at Child Care Resources. Christin has also worked for over 10 years at Child Care Services Association as a trainer and technical assistance provider. Prior to this role, Christin worked as an infant teacher and a director of a child care facility. Christin loves connecting with children, families, and early care professions to support their growth and learning in this rapidly changing field. Now I will turn over to our presenters to start the session. Again, thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you this morning. Christin sends her regards. Unfortunately, she's unable to attend. She's had a family issue that she has to attend to today. And so I will be holding down the fort, but she has helped me design and write all the talking points for this. So she is well represented in this training. And she sends her best to everyone who is here with us today. Right. So before we get started, I also like to just to let everybody know, I do have 2 dogs, 2 cats, and 2 children, any of whom may show up in the background at any given time. So just fair warning, please forgive me if anyone pops up. Especially, I do have one cat who especially loves when I talk on Zoom and likes to come sit right next to me. So if you see him, he may come and join us as well. So to start us off today, particularly because you've already been in one session and it may or may not have had to do with the word advocacy, I want to hear from you all. When you hear the word advocacy, what does that mean to you? What comes to mind? Feel free to either put it in the chat or to come off mute and share. What do you think when you hear the word advocacy?
Being a voice for someone that may not be confident enough to speak out, or for advocate for a certain group that you're passionate about.
Absolutely passionate and speaking for others who can't necessarily speak. Yes. Speaking up for yourself, representation, great. Support, awesome. Yes, I love that. Representation, I love that. What I'm going to share in just a minute are some definitions that I use when we're kind of doing this training. They're not exhaustive. Awareness, great, Angel, thank you. They're not all of the definitions. It certainly means everything that you all have shared. I think everything you shared is what I'm going to share also. But just to give you an idea of, as we talk about this word today, what we're talking about, claiming your space. Absolutely. I love that. Claiming your space for sure. Well, we're going to come back to that a lot this morning, I think. Value and visibility, ownership and accountability. Yes, all of those things. So as we're talking today, we're going to talk about advocacy as creating support for an issue among different audiences. So that might include educating, that might include drawing people into your cause or convincing people to speak up. But it's building support for an issue among different audiences. So knowing how to talk to the general public, but also to elected officials, to all different types of folks. Taking action to defend or promote a cause that's important to you. Showing public support. I often think of when you see different meetings, different kind of public meetings, and you see folks standing outside and protesting or standing outside with signs, that is a showing of public support. That is a version of advocacy. Standing up for what you believe in. Educating the public and policymakers about your passion. Sharing information and resources about what is important for children and families. All of those, I think, kind of lend themselves to this idea of support, representation, awareness, claiming space, taking up space, being a value, visibility, ownership, accountability, making change happen in communities, all of those things, absolutely. The other two things I always like to put out when we get started is that advocacy is a team sport. So the more people, you can absolutely advocate on your own. There's nothing wrong with being an advocate on your own. And also when we advocate in numbers, when we have a group of people together to advocate, we have a lot of traction and we get a lot of power. And so thinking about that collective power that we can have in large groups is really important. And also the advocacy is active. So it's an action-based thing. That doesn't mean that you have to be out in the streets or out talking to people. If you're somebody who says, I don't want to go into somebody's office and talk to them, that's not where I feel comfortable. That's absolutely fine. There are lots of ways to advocate from afar and still take action. And we'll talk about what some of those things are as we walk through this. We're also going to talk about different types of advocacy as we kind of go through today. We're going to talk about, as we talk about advocacy, I want you to keep in mind that advocacy is not only legislative advocacy. A lot of times folks come into trainings and think about advocacy only in terms of talking to federal or state policymakers. And it is absolutely that. That is one really important type of advocacy. And we will talk a lot about that kind of advocacy towards the end of our training today. It is absolutely not the only kind of advocacy. And it is, it's a type of advocacy that's also informed by other things. So while it's important, it's not the only kind. There's also administrative advocacy, which means changing policy rules or regulations at the state level. So that can mean doing things like talking to organizations at the state level that might control policies or rules for programs or institutions that you work with that you feel like may need to be updated or adjusted. And then there's also media advocacy, which can be creating public awareness and support around key issues. And that can look like getting newspaper coverage or writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor. It can also look like having news coverage come to an event, or it can look like doing a social media campaign. It can be all of the above. So all of those different things can be types of advocacy. At times, all three of them work together, right? For different impact. So as we get into talking about all three of those types of advocacy, it's important for us to understand the roots of the systems that we're all working in. So for a few minutes, and we're going to do a very abbreviated version of this because we only have an hour together today, but I do feel like it's always important to set the stage for understanding that the role that white supremacy and structural racism and power in general play in our in why we're advocating and how we're advocating and the roles that we all take in this process. So in order to do that, we first need to understand kind of this concept of power. And so a lot of times, the idea of power is that, power is relational. In a lot of relationships, one person or group has power over another. So it's a term between human beings in different types of settings, whether it's historical, economic, political, or social. So historically, and in current time, power is control of or access to institutions sanctioned by the state. So when I say institutions sanctioned by the state, that can mean public schools, that can mean government organizations. And when we look back historically, that can mean access to voting. When we look historically and when we look currently, all of those types of institutions are controlled by folks who have power and are holding on to power. And also, if we look back not that long ago, only very small groups of people were able to access those institutions for a very long period of time. So for a long period of time, only primarily white men were able to access positions in government, the ability to vote, the ability to be educated, and only much more recently were women and people of color able to access those institutions sanctioned by the state. So it's important to know who's in control of those and how they're in control of those. Power is also ownership and control of the major resources of the state and the capacity to make and enforce decisions based on this ownership and control. So I'm going to say a couple things here, and these I always clarify this because I had a couple people in my last session who went in the chat. What did you just say? So in North Carolina, we have a $9 or $10 billion bank account right now, and that's billion with a B. And it's not just a bank account, it's a surplus, which means it's money we haven't spent from previous years. So in the chat, a couple of times people said, did you mean million or billion? I meant billion with a B. So I want you to sit with that for just a second. And in the General Assembly, there are about 200 people, give or take a few, who are in control of how the state budget will be made. Okay. The population of North Carolina is considerably bigger than 200 people, but around 200 people, give or take, will vote on how the budget of the state is written, how much of that $9 or $10 billion gets allocated to that budget, and how that money will be used to support or not the rest of us in the state. That's a lot of power. Billions of dollars is a lot of power. So those 200 folks who are sitting in the General Assembly, regardless of what political party they're in, hold a lot of power. So that's one way to think about this. Power is also the capacity of a group of people to decide what they want in an organized way and to get it. So that's when we kind of flip the script a little bit, right? So power is absolutely with those 200 people who have that huge bank account sitting in Raleigh, right? Power is also with us as a group of people who have gotten together on a Saturday to kind of learn and grow together, and the capacity that a group of people can have to say, hey, we think this is really important. We can organize around this, and then we can take what we think to those other people in power, and we can apply some pressure and get something done. So just because those folks have power doesn't mean that we as individuals and as families and as parents and as residents of North Carolina are powerless. So I want to make sure that that's really clear. We all have a lot of individual power as well. Absolutely, knowledge is power, yes. And power is also the ability to define reality and convince other people that that definition is true. So when you read that last bullet, I want you to think, and regardless of your own feelings or your political affiliation, I use this example. And power is the ability to define reality and convince other people that that is the definition. And the perfect example of that is the 2020 election. So we had an election in 2020. There are a group of people who decided that that election was invalid. And there are a group of people who still believe 3 years later that that election is invalid. That the people who created that narrative and have maintained that narrative have power, right? They have the power to create it and to get people to believe that their narrative is the truth. So there's lots of different types of power that sit in lots of different areas, right? Yes, Tony, power is the strength to build a strong foundation. Absolutely. So now that we've kind of covered that, I want to give just a couple of illustrations about who in this country holds power. So if we look at this pie chart, and this is kind of old data, so it's shifted a little bit since then, not dramatically, but it shifted a little bit. The last election definitely shifted this a little bit. But in 2019, the pie charts over here were the demographics of political power. So if you look at the left, it shows the breakdown of the United States population based on the census. So we have 30% white men, 31% white women, 19% men of color, 20% women of color. Okay. Not too unequal, not entirely balanced, but not too unequal. If we shift over to the right a little bit, that shows us who is elected to represent the population of the United States. So what does that tell you? When you look at the US Census and who the population is and compare that to who our elected officials are, what's your reaction to those two charts next to each other? What does that tell you?
I think one of the things is that the more knowledge that people are gaining, things are shifting and there's transition happening. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing as I'm looking at your graph as well, that the individuals who have the less power are becoming more conscious that they have, as you said, that internal power, but also the local power that they have, that they're not depending on the Washington to save them in. They're looking at what is in my community, what resources, how can I use my powers to shift the narrative, to restore my family and my community. So I think it's what is happening is it's becoming more local. The energy has always been, from the works I've done, it's always been the federal to local model. But I think people are really stopping and reading and going, oh, it's been there, but we didn't buy it. So I think we're seeing the shift of people saying this urgency is moving beyond just the race as well, but it's the have and have not. And the gap is getting wider in some aspects as we're working really hard to close those gaps.
Absolutely. And I think, if we look at the two graphics kind of compared to each other, we see that in 2019, as Annabelle posted, we have we don't have appropriate representation of the people who were elected then to represent as compared to the census. But as Tanya pointed out, when we look at the playing, like how things are shifting, we are seeing shifting in a more equitable measure or equitable way. So we're starting to see both more women of color, women in general, and men of color running for office and being elected to office. And we're seeing more of those folks running at also at a state and county level, which is great because we are seeing more of that shift to grassroots to grass tops instead of the other way, right? Starting from the bottom leading up instead of the top down. So there are, and this graphic on the right does not include, that's 2012 to 2018, does not include the 2022 election. And we saw a lot of shifts in that election as well. And I also want to point out, none of these include age as a as a criteria. And I think in the 2022 election we had the youngest person ever elected to Congress. And that's another piece of the puzzle, is not only from a race, ethnicity, and gender perspective, but also from an age perspective, how diverse are the folks who are coming into power. And traditionally that has trended on the older end of things. And now we're starting to see that shift younger as well. So the more we're diversifying that, the more we're kind of able to push against these structural, more embedded, structuralized systems of power that aren't working for everyone. And we can kind of start to see some more structural change. But we're working against something that's really been ingrained for a long time and that a lot of people don't want to see change. So the other piece I want to talk about here before we move into our next section is that systematic oppression, and this is something you may hear me say a little bit later, is that a lot of the systems that we have that produce injustice and that produce unequal opportunity for folks, especially for any of you that have worked in early childhood or have been around early childhood folks, we are very kind. And we always like to give people the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, well, they just don't know how to do it better. And I always hate to be a wet blanket, but I also am here to tell you that a lot of times when we see systems that have inequities built into them, that those systems are working exactly as they were designed to work. A lot of systems were created specifically to keep people in power and keep people in power and who are educated and who have money in that position, and to keep people who don't have money and who are not educated and do not have power in that position. And so we have to look at things through this lens of systematic oppression. And what that means is understanding that in that situation, individuals have beliefs and actions that will perpetuate oppression, and also institutions, people have created in institutions policies and practices that perpetuate oppression. Okay. And so the interaction between those institutional practices and individual desires to continue to have those practices work is how we continue to have systematic oppression happen. So yes, the more representation we have locally, absolutely. The more representation we can get, the more we can have people speaking up and getting relationships with folks who are representing in all different levels, the more we can get people to say yes to the things that we know we need to say yes to. I'm going to give one example of this before we move on. An example that I always give, which is, I think, the easiest example, and it's something that we have seen get overcome in a lot of places, is for years, those of you that, if anybody's familiar with child care subsidy from, I'd say, I don't even know how long ago, 5-10 years ago, parents typically had to come in every 60 to 90 days to recertify for child care subsidy. Meaning that every 60 to 90 days, they had to come into the childcare, wherever their childcare subsidy was administered from, between business hours, typically between the hours of 8 and 5, Monday through Friday, which is often working hours for the parents as well, right? They had to bring certain paperwork with them, and they had to do the recertification process. Now, as someone who has had young children and knows how hard it can be to get out of my children are old enough now that I wouldn't say getting out of the house is easy, but it's easier than it was when they were very little. Getting out of the house with young children, getting time off of work to do this, all of those pieces, those are policies and practices at the organizational level that perpetuate oppression. Okay, that is not an easy and equitable policy that makes life, that looks at what parents and families are going through, what they might need, and what might work better for them. Now, what we've seen change and what we've seen shift is that now, by and large, families have to recertify once a year. So you still have to jump through that hoop, but you only have to do it once every 12 months, which is much more manageable and much more equitable than having to do it every 60 to 90 days. So there is possibility to shift and to make change, but that was not an easy change to make. It took time and it took effort. It took a lot of advocacy at that administrative level to be able to make that happen. So we're going to move forward now a little bit to thinking about how decisions are made. And this, I also call this kind of how the sausage is made, how decisions are made in terms of legislation, in terms of policy, in terms of law. And the example I always give here, the quote I always use here, is from a philosopher that says, just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics doesn't take an interest in you, which I think is really important because for a lot of folks, you may know, and I know I have friends who have said this to me before. They say, well, politics aren't really for me. I don't really care about them. And I say, well, isn't that great for you? That doesn't mean that what the decisions people make aren't going to have an impact on your life. So you don't have to, that doesn't mean you have to work on someone's campaign, and you don't have to, watch the news constantly, but you might want to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on, what people are doing, because it is likely going to have an impact on your life and what you're doing from day to day. So when we think about how public policy happens, it really is coming from all of us. Like it can come from the grassroots. It can come from citizens and advocates, just like all of us, from professionals and experts. Again, you all are experts. You all have lived experiences. You all have professional experiences. You all have so many experiences that make you experts in your own way. The public policy comes from research and data, from all sorts of ways. But the biggest thing I can kind of impose here is that a big part of that is that laws that get passed every day in this state and in other states come from everyday citizens like you and me, creating relationships with lawmakers and having conversations with them. So I will say a couple folks in my last training were old enough that they remembered watching this on Saturday mornings during cartoons, just like I do. Some of you may remember that also. Some of you may not. I'm going to take just 3 minutes to show this to you. You may also know, sorry, I'm just going to pause it real quick. There is a newer version of similar content on Netflix called We the People. I use this one because it's nostalgic for me, and a lot of folks remember it from their own childhood. But that's also something you may want to check out if you get a chance and if you have access to Netflix. But we're going to watch this one together. Let me just make sure I have this ready, and hopefully this will go.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. How I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
All right, let me just get us back to our presentation here. Okay, so the reason I show you that video is really to kind of refresh your memory if you ever had to take a civics class and maybe forgot how the process works, but also because I think it's pretty amazing that they were able to make a 3-minute video that really explains how the whole legislative process works in a pretty effective way. And so that really is the way that laws get made. And when we're talking about advocacy and our role as advocates, that very first section when folks go to their lawmaker and say, hey, this is a problem, is how so many of our laws get made in this state and in this country. It's not quite that easy. A lot of times a lawmaker might disagree with you and say, well, you might think that. I don't really think that that's a big deal. I don't really want to write that bill. But also, it doesn't mean that all lawmakers will say that. So if one lawmaker says no, there might be other lawmakers who will say yes. But it's important for us to know that that's a big part of how the process works. I'm going to spend really quick minute explaining a little bit about how funding flows so that you can understand the budget slide that we'll spend just a snippet more time on. So early childhood funding flows from 2 ways. So one, it flows from the feds, from Washington, and second, it flows from the state. So when you think about early childhood programs, if you've had experience with Head Start, Early Head Start, or anything that's been funded by the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which is typically goes through the Division of Child Development, all of those funds come from the federal government directly to the entities that spend the money. So directly to the Head Start program, Head Start grantee, Early Head Start grantee, or to the Division of Child Development and Early Education, meaning they don't get touched by our state elected officials in the General Assembly. Now, state money, that's the budget that the General Assembly or North Carolina House and Senate put together, is money that typically is used to pay for childcare subsidy. Some of it is used for childcare resource and referral funding. It pays for Smart Start program or Smart Start partnerships in all of the counties, and also NC Pre-K. So when you think in your community and in your experiences, if you've had a child that's you, or if you work in the early childhood field and you've experienced or accessed any of those services, understanding how that money flows tells us who we need to talk to if we want money for any of those programs, right? If you want to advocate for increased money for the Child Care and Development Block Grant, going to our state legislators isn't going to help. They don't have anything to do with that. That has to go directly to Washington to advocate for that. But if we want to advocate for funding for things like NC Pre-K or childcare subsidy or things like that, those are things that we can advocate for in Raleigh, because those are the things that our folks are making decisions about. Now, that being said, I'm going to remind you, a couple slides ago, I made sure I said billion with a B. And so when we look at this slide, this is just an overview of how funding is spent, specifically when we're talking about early childhood. So we look at the North Carolina state budget historically for the last 10 to 12 years. It's really, really small. If you look at this dollar bill all the way on the right side, early childhood education takes up 1.10% of the North Carolina state budget. And that has been flat for about 10 to 12 years, 1%. Now we know we have that $9 to $10 billion in the bank. So there's potential for growth. But right now we get 1% of the budget, which is nowhere near enough. We know that we have shortages in all areas of early childhood. And I want to hear from you about what you see as those issues in just a second. But I just want to set the stage for you so you can understand how much is or is not being spent in our area. You can also see down in this corner for the things that are split, so childcare subsidies, some NC pre-K and some Smart Start, how it's split between state and federal in terms of who's spending money on what. So the state doesn't actually, the majority of what the state spends is Smart Start, some NC pre-K, but a lot of that comes from the education lottery and then childcare subsidies. We're going to skip this slide. I'll give you the high, the big view is just that budget bills are really passed just like any other bills that we heard in that song. The House writes a budget, Senate writes a budget, the governor writes a budget, and the president writes a budget. And then they all try to reconcile and see what everyone can agree on. In North Carolina, it's typically a very messy process, but hopefully we're on track to see a good budget this year that hopefully will have a lot of early childhood funding in it, fingers crossed. So I've talked for a long time. So what I want to hear from you all, from your perspective, either as parents or as someone who's maybe worked in early childhood or as someone who is both, what I want to hear from you is what issues do you feel are pertinent in your advocacy journey today? So as a parent in North Carolina or as an early childhood professional in North Carolina, what are the issues that you're passionate about advocating for? What do you feel like you need more of? What do you need less of? What helps? What hurts? So let's just share for about 4 or 5 minutes, either in the chat or coming off of mute, what you think is important to you.
Wage increase for our early childhood educators.
Absolutely. I will tell you, I have been doing this work for an awfully long time. And that's the issue that has been on top of mind the longest. And also we're getting, we keep getting more and more traction just in the last few years. So I'm hopeful that we're making some progress in that way. But absolutely, wages for early education workforce is huge. What else? And if it's not in early childhood, that's fine. If it's something else that you feel strongly about, that is perfectly fine to share also. Yes.
No sé si cuento con la traducción. Ok, pienso que deberían de haber maestros más preparados con todas las deshabilidades que puedan tener nuestros niños, empezando la cultural, como ha dicho al principio, también tomando en cuenta la adaptación que necesitan nuestros niños cuando llegan aquí. Sí. Sí. Okay, es que estoy hablando tal vez por el micrófono. Tal vez ahora me escucha mejor. Ok, creo que debería de ser invertido o invertir más dinero en preparar a los profesores con tema a nuestros niños, a las disabilidades.
If there's no interpreter, I can serve as an interpreter.
I think there is. I'm not sure if she can come back to if she's able to speak to the main group or not.
Okay. Let me know. I'm bilingual. So.
Okay. Thank you. Let me ask.
Ok, entonces sería preparar a los profesores. pero es que no he terminado, entonces no sé si puedo continuar.
Continúe.
Just sent her a chat to see.
Ok, preparar a los profesores para que tengan más, tal vez, conocimiento de las deshabilidades, cuando los niños llegan aquí, adaptación y también recursos, porque hoy en día hay muchísimos problemas de salud mental que ni siquiera sabíamos que existían o que creemos que no existen. Entonces creo que las escuelas deberían de tener más recursos para dar diagnósticos de salud mental, aparte de terapias y tratamientos, también refiriéndose a niños que a veces no tienen un seguro, un Medicare. Entonces creo que debería de haber más recursos, tal vez dentro del sistema escolar, pero también en niños de 0 a 5 años, tal vez alguna institución, no sé. Y aparte de eso, los profesionales. O sea, que estén preparados las personas de la escuela y a más que tengan recursos para que hayan personas extra que sean profesionales en la salud mental. Gracias.
Thank you for sharing. I'm just waiting to see if we'll be able to have that, waiting for our translator. So that's okay. She's working on it. I can see it on her video.
Susan, for me, as a person who's been in early education, getting very close to 40 years, I'm trying not to be in a space of discouraged with what's going on, because I feel like we have made some, even though we're making or attempting to make some strides going forward, I can see where, as you start the conversation about systematic racism and how systems greatly have impacted where we are today in childcare. I think what we have gotten to a place is we have literally, as we're trying to move the needle forward, we have made some major the people that have been in position to make decisions, or because we have worked to make voices smaller, we have made some great strides backwards. And it's concerning me, especially in the rural areas of early child programs. There's a slide you showed about 3 or 4 slides back, as you were showing how the funding comes federal down to a local level. It's real interesting how the mother of organizations have taught the children to fight each other, which is very disturbing, because when you look at the movements of where we're moving now, you're seeing that the way it's funneling down through these systematical structures, we're favoring one child over the other. And I think one of the biggest things is the little bit of child care that we have with some heartbeat still in this state and the country. We're merging, but not really thinking about how some of early childhood was sustained during COVID, but the shifts that we're making, how we're moving from one side of the house to the other, can greatly have some detrimental impact on families, because the burden of childcare is expensive. We know families not only are choosing between childcare and going to work, or childcare, food on the table, childcare, personal hygiene products. What does this mean, not only just as a women's issue, but a family issue? You can see how it has really greatly impacted. So when we've lost, I think last number was 200,000 early childhood professionals post-COVID, we have to come to reality. These individuals are not coming back. This was a very heavy female industry. Women of color held those positions, but we were showing data right before COVID that we're seeing more white females in early childhood. And when we started looking at education, we start looking at credentialing, we start looking at curriculum and assessment and all the things that go with early childhood, we can still see that white men still lead or own those things, and off the backs of the most invisible, the most impoverished in the system. So I'm a little nervous because when we, I'm doing cost analysis right now, and we're finally telling the truth. And I've been saying it for 20 years and gotten kicked out of so many meetings because I'm going, we're not telling our story correctly. And we're looking at numbers now that infant care really is more closer to $21,000 to $25,000 a year, not $9,000. So it's huge. So, what does that mean if you are a family, the families who have the resources, the families that are savvy, the families that are connected, the families that are not invisible, they have become creative and innovative in their childcare options. Where we're seeing is the disproportion of families that lack the information that you're sharing today, lack the resources. They're not even accessing the programs like Head Start, the NC Pre-K, because they're exhausted. They're exhausted because they were the invisible individuals during COVID. They were working the 1, 2, 4 jobs and a side hustle during COVID. So that sense of hopelessness is reeking through North Carolina, and it's not quiet. It's not a slow reek now. I might call it the drain, the early childhood drain. So we're so good at saying the childcare desert. Is more of a childcare drain that is happening because of we have a portal of we're not pouring into high quality care anymore. We're back to warm bodies and rooms. We're back to people who really are in crisis, who are choosing or have no choice for childcare outside the home, having to go into places that are really not healthy and helpful to them. So, we're in a place where the people who are at the table, we have to realize they're talking, but we're past talking. We got to do some real foot actions. We got to get some real movements and really hear the people, see the people that this is impacting, because we don't have another 20 years to address this issue. We're now 2-3 generations of people impacted by poor quality child care. And so, or the lack of quality care, because we're hearing the stories, we're seeing it in adult behavior, we're seeing it in communities, and we're seeing it just as a society. So this I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation, but I think we have to really look at what we're doing, because it's a little nervous, and because as we old gray head people in childcare now, I've come to a conclusion, like I'm the elder kind of in the village kind of thing. It's nervous to see the direction we're going. Because so many families, if they're having to choose between a student loan bill and childcare or a mortgage, and if you're a single head of household, you're not winning. So we're seeing more kids, 76% of kids are in single head of households, which means you have a higher increase, 300 times, 500 times likely to be in poverty. So they can't get out of that hole.
Yes, exactly. And I wanted to share, I got a couple things here. Thank you, Tanya, for that. I think you're exactly right. I think that there's so many points in that I think are so important. And I think one of them I want to really lift up is that, I don't know if somebody's trying to share. I think somebody's just unmuted. I wanted to share the statement from before was, I believe that teachers need to be trained. This was the statement that was in Spanish. I believe that teachers need to be trained, have more knowledge on disabilities. For example, mental health, have resources for children without Medicare or insurance. So if you're not muted, if you could try to mute for us. I think somebody's accidentally unmuted.
Can everyone please make sure that you are muted? I'm trying to go down the list to see.
Yeah, I can't quite tell who it is. But it was, I believe that teachers need to be trained, have more knowledge on disabilities, for example, mental health, have resources for children without Medicare or insurance. Staff at school need to be more prepared with all the levels of mental health that we are witnessing. Absolutely. That is, we've heard that a lot from teachers and from administrators as well. And that the children can't, children don't have the ability to advocate for themselves, right? That's one big role that we as adults have to kind of take on for them. And I also want to take a moment and really lift up one of the things that Tanya said, which was that the workforce, it's the workforce of the early childhood system is typically women of color who have supported, we're the workforce behind the workforce, right? If childcare doesn't exist, if we don't show up to care for children, people don't go to work. And so one of the things that I have talked a lot about with statewide advocates and with some of our legislators is that we have benefited for years off of the backs of women of color who are making poverty wages, and now it's the reckoning, right? Like now we are like, the system has to pay up because folks are not standing for it anymore, and they shouldn't, right? We shouldn't have to have folks who are having to make poverty wages to be able to do the important work that they're doing. I do have some good news about that I do want to share with you all before we're done. And I know we only have a couple more minutes, but I also want to say there are so many good points in the chat. And I've been trying to read them and make note of them, but better managers of programs, a lot of folks that I think a lot of notes in there that sometimes managers are focused on the bottom line as opposed to focused on what children need, depending on the type of program. A lot of notes about children's mental health and supporting teachers to support that. Children can't identify their own mental health issues, creating funding and scholarships for teachers to join the field. Absolutely. So what I'm going to do here, and we've identified a lot of these, but I want to skip to one more thing, and then I do want to share about one more point before we're done. So as we're talking about advocacy, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to think about yourself and about your own lived experience and the ways that you can use that to work with policymakers and others who have that voice. Because what we know persuades policymakers are all of the things in these boxes. And we've already talked about the urgent need. We've hit that, right? We know we have urgent need. Messages and messengers are the next thing. You all are the best messengers we have. I can go talk to folks all day long. My children are in elementary school. I don't pay for childcare anymore. I don't live that. So while I can make some points, they'd rather hear from folks who are living it every day. And compelling real stories from your classrooms if you're a teacher, stories from searching for childcare if you're a parent, from how difficult it is to pay that childcare bill if you're a parent. Those are the stories, those are the things that we have found do change minds. And they do, minds can be changed, absolutely. We've seen it happen. I'm just going to skip to our last thing I want to point out before I give you some good news about early childhood policy in the state. We have seen minds change. We have a couple of legislators who were not initially supporters who have come around to saying, okay, I get it. I'll do what I can to really support early childhood and your causes. So it can happen, but we have to be in their face and kind of on their doorstep and sharing those stories. So a couple of different ways to do that. What we always advocate for and suggest is what we call a surround sound approach. So getting at policymakers in all the different ways that you can. So that can be emailing those that represent you. On the coalition's website, which I think was dropped in the chat at the very beginning, we have an action center and ways for you to find out who all of your representatives are if you don't know. Calling them. Social media is a great way if you can tag your legislators in tweets or Instagram or Facebook. Visiting them, particularly when they're home, when they're not in session. They're in session now, but they go home for breaks and then they're in your district and you don't have to travel to Raleigh. Or asking for visits virtually. They love visiting with constituents and will listen to, we'll let you have a meeting with them to tell you about your experiences, or contacting your local media and sharing with them that way. You can also always reach out to, I'm going to put my information up. You can also always reach out to me if you have questions about how to do any of that. I'm more than happy to talk you through what next steps are, how you can be engaged and involved with advocacy efforts and talking through. I know somebody had put in the chat and I've lost it. The chat was blowing up there for a minute. Ramona, I hope I said your name right. Somebody said, what should we be doing to fix these? How do we change things? And part of what we do to change things is we get loud. We get loud and we get assertive, and we really we draw on that power that we talked about of organizing a large group of people who have the same passion and focus, right? So the last piece I want to leave you with, since we have 1 minute left, is on Thursday, there were the Early Childhood Caucus, which is a group in the North Carolina General Assembly. It's Republicans and Democrats, both from the House and the Senate, held a press conference after meeting with lots of advocates, and they proposed 5 bills. They filed 5 different early childhood bills in the General Assembly. One is for funding to increase the sustained compensation grants for the early childhood field, to extend those for a period of time. One is to address subsidy and to increase subsidy rate reimbursement, which is huge. One is for maternal health and doulas for prenatal support and Medicaid, which is also huge. And I've just lost the last one I wanted to share with you, but please go check those out. I also want to share with you, there is a big advocacy day coming up in April. And we would love to have you join us if you're interested and you're able to. If you're not able to come to Raleigh for it, feel free to, there's plenty of events or ways that you can join locally. Feel free to check out the website. You can sign up to get more information there, but it's an opportunity to just kind of join together and learn more about advocacy, but also just to use your voice to speak out in support of early childhood issues. But I thank you for your time, and my email's on there. Feel free to reach out with anything you need. I've enjoyed having you all today, and I enjoy your passion, and thank you for all that you do.